Okay, good afternoon again. So, for today's book review, I will be reviewing the Poetic Edda. So, this doesn't really have like an author of any sort. For those who don't know, the Poetic Edda is essentially a collection of most likely not ancient poems, but very, very old poems. A collection of poems that originate from Scandinavia, particularly the Nordic countries such as Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden. Um, and the Poetic Eddas are essentially, or the Poetic Edda, sorry, the Poetic Edda is essentially our number one resource um, for the tales of the Norse gods. That's what I've heard. That's what that's what Jackson Crawford. This is Jackson Crawford's translation, by the way. I love Jackson Crawford. He's a great man. Um, and um, I've heard from the man Jackson Crawford himself that this is our number one source on the Norse gods. But then there's also things such as the Codex Regius and other crazy documents that are lying around in Iceland that I don't really know much about. I don't really know what they are, but they seem like though it seems like those things would be more primary than the collection of these things. But I'm uneducated on that, so I'm not going to comment any further. Um, anyway, this is a very very good translation. This is 10 out of 10. Excuse me. I would say hands down best translation of the Eddas. Um, it's a very modern translation. It uses modern language without sacrificing the ancient feeling of the poems, right? It's a very easy read. I read this whole thing in less than a week. Probably took me only a couple days actually. I'd say they're very good bedtime stories. Is probably what I would say about the poems themselves. Um, as for because as I said, this is the primary source for the Norse gods that we have, um, and that was an entire. This essentially conveys is supposed to convey an entire religion, right? Or at least the very little that we know about an entire religion. This is supposed to convey almost everything we know about the religion. Is essentially what I'm trying to say. Um, and obviously, since it is mostly inherently religious text, I'm going to give my thoughts on kind of what I think it is, which is that there's some cool stuff in here for sure. There's some cool stuff in here for sure. Like their stories are very interesting, but even what is considered to be the spiritual crowning jewel of the Poetic Edda, the Havamal, the poem of Odin's wisdom, even the Havamal kind of falls short compared to some other religious texts out there. It's it very much seems like it was written by someone who was trying to give a guiding hand in pre-industrial Scandinavia where it was so bitterly cold rather than someone who was actually inspired by deity. It just some of the things it talks about aren't really super mystical. And this is the Havamal explicitly I'm talking about right now. The Havamal, other than Odin's rune poem at the end, the Havamal isn't super duper mystical. It's not super philosophical. It's pretty much just things like make sure you always have your spear on you, or like be kind to a stranger that comes to your door. Just like pretty much just a guiding hand for how to live your life if you lived in pre-industrial Scandinavia um, without efficient heating and like ovens and stuff like that. I you would have a very very hard, if not impossible, time convincing me that the Eddas were divinely inspired poems. That's not to say they aren't absolute works of art and they aren't masterpieces, because they are. They're very, very excellently written poems. But I don't think they were divinely inspired. Um, I think I don't think I'm gonna give this one a rating, since it's like the Poetic Edda. Um, and it's just like, it is what it is. It's an artifact more than it is a book, right? So yeah, those are my thoughts on the Poetic Edda.